Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Nessie's Dead. Of course, we are your hosts, Spencer and Helen.
Hello.
Hello, and it's a good thing we introduce ourselves because it's been a while, and our adoring audience has potentially forgotten who we are.
Yes, we took a little break from season one that we wrapped up, and we are now entering our season two.
Yes, and it's going to be filled with even more horror and true crime and spookiness for all of you. So we're
Yes,
excited to be back.
very exciting stuff lined up.
Yes, and hopefully this is an episode that we have wanted to do and we have attempted it, and we have been met with technical errors or issues repeatedly. So hopefully today we can actually get going on this story.
Yes, this is one we've done, maybe 3 times now?
I think there have been 3 attempts at it. So
Yes, and every single time it
something
sounds
goes
like,
wrong.
yeah, it sounds like it's recording perfectly. And then the first one, we couldn't even use the audio, was completely gone. And then the second one, the entire time it echoed. So fingers crossed this time. Now, this is one that we have tried so many times because it's one that's near and dear to your heart.
It is. It's a very, very, very famous case that everyone is familiar with. But what I realized is a lot of people are not familiar with a lot of the details. And this case has also been, it is a true crime case, but there's a lot of false information around it. And there's a lot of victim blaming within this case as well, which we will not have any of that. But I did kind of want to get a little bit of this victim's story straight and tell the story in a little bit of a truer light and not all about the falsehoods that have come along through it.
So we're going to take the plunge.
We are, and specifically we will be plunging into the case of Elizabeth Short, also known as the Black Dahlia.
All right, let's see what you got.
So Elizabeth Short was born in Boston on July 24th, 1924, to her mother Phoebe May Sawyer and her father Cleo Short. She predominantly grew up in Medford, Massachusetts. They did kind of move around a little bit, and she actually had quite a bit of health issues as a child. She had childhood tuberculosis and really bad asthma. So she did have a brief moment where she lived in Florida. I don't remember exactly where in Florida, but I do know she spent some time in Florida as, I think, like a 12-year-old or an early teen, just to kind of have a different climate for her health.
Yeah, which was, a lot of people did that back then.
Yeah, and so she was growing up in the 1930s, which was a very rough time for people to be growing up because Great Depression.
Yeah.
But something to make it even more rough for her and her family, her father actually is out of the picture by 1930 when his car was found abandoned at the Charleston Bridge, and it was assumed that he had taken his own life and just completely abandoned the family.
Did they ever find him, or are you going to cover that?
Well, by 1942, 12 years later, her father actually resurfaces with a letter that he sends to the family apologizing for his absence and notifying them that he's actually been living in Southern California the entire time.
That bastard.
Yes. So Elizabeth actually decided, oh, hey, he's reaching back out. Maybe he wants to have a relationship. I want to get out of Massachusetts. So she decides to head out to California, show up at his doorstep and be like, hey, Dad. And she actually asked him if she could move in with him.
Bold move right there.
Well, in my opinion, what's more bold is he was hesitant to even allow her to move in. She did convince him to let her stay at the house with him, but the condition was that she had to take care of the house and kind of be like his maid.
Well, that doesn't surprise me. He doesn't seem like the very fatherly type of man.
No, he was not getting father of anything award.
No.
However, she was eventually kicked out of the house. She was going out to bars quite a bit at this time. She would have been about 18 or 19 years old. And only about a year later, in 1943, she gets arrested for underage drinking. When this happens, the police were like, hey, you gotta leave. Why don't you go back home? Go back to Massachusetts. Just get out of California, which is such a weird response, you know?
That's very odd to me because it's just underage drinking. They're like, "Go on, get out of our town."
Yeah, like go back to where you came from. But she does oblige. She does leave. But instead of going back to Massachusetts, she goes back to Florida. And while she was back in Florida, she meets and falls in love with Major Matthew Martin Gordon Jr., which is just a great name.
It's an epic name. You do
It is.
love those,
I love those
really.
old drawn out names.
You do.
He was actually in the Air Force, but he had sadly died in a plane crash in 1945. But something very interesting to note is that his family came forward saying that they were never together. He was never with Elizabeth Short and that she lied about the whole thing. It does seem that she could have potentially been a compulsive liar because there are quite a few things that have come out about her that it turns out was not true, or she just has a lot of different stories going on at once. Like a lot of different people knew a lot of different versions of her.
Hmm.
So this is one of them, and who knows, maybe their love was secret.
Yeah,
Maybe he didn't tell his family about her, and that's why the family assumed that Elizabeth had been lying about the relationship. I don't know.
that's possible.
Innocent till proven guilty.
Right?
So, anyway, after he dies in the plane crash, she decides to head back to California, specifically Los Angeles. And this is in 1946. And also at this time, she was kind of bouncing around with where she was living, which kind of inspired people to assume that she was homeless or that she was a prostitute, neither of which were necessarily true. I mean, she was not a prostitute, but it was actually very common at this time in the late 40s for these like kind of group home situations, like having a ton of roommates in one place and bouncing around to different houses and apartments and whatnot. Just, everything was kind of crazy with the whole World War II experience.
Yeah.
And so she was kind of bouncing around residences. At one point, when she first got back to California, she was staying at the Hawthorne Hotel. And then she ends up spending time living in the house of a club owner named Mark Hansen. What's really interesting is that she was Mark Hansen's girlfriend's roommate, and they all lived in the house together, but the girlfriend shared a room with Elizabeth, which I thought was very odd, but maybe that's of the time or something.
I don't know. That seems weird.
But something else that was kind of odd within this whole situation with Mark Hansen is she ends up going to San Diego not long after this. And right before she heads out to San Diego, Mark Hansen gifts her a little address book. And on the cover, it says Mark M. Hansen, 1937. And inside of it, he had written down all these names and numbers of well-known Hollywood people.
That's
And
nice.
yeah, so this was a little gift and, like, hey, like here are connections and here's some fancy people. And I'm not totally sure why he gifted her this book.
It's a little odd that it has his name on it and not hers.
Well, it
Like,
was his book,
oh,
and I
okay.
guess he didn't want it, or maybe he had a new address book, so he was giving it to her.
Makes sense. Yeah.
A lot of people have this idea that the reason she had gone to LA in the first place was because she wanted to be an actress, which is not necessarily true.
That's what I always heard.
Yeah, her parents even said, no, she never said anything about Hollywood or acting or singing or anything. And of course, it could have been maybe a new dream. She's hanging out in Los Angeles and she's gorgeous. And that was kind of what you needed. You didn't need talent to get into the industry at this time. You just needed predominantly to be good looking. So maybe people in LA were like, hey, Elizabeth, you're gorgeous. You could be an actress.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe it sparked in her mind that she wanted to give it a try, and that's why she got the address book.
That makes complete sense. It could have been a completely new dream of hers, or not even a dream. Maybe just so many people were feeding it to her.
Yeah,
and
something to do.
and maybe he felt the same way, and he was like, "Here you go, kid. See if you can't make something of yourself."
Yeah. Now, it was also around this time that she developed the famous nickname Black Dahlia. And this was due to a popular movie at the time called The Blue Dahlia and the fact that she was known for wearing all black. So the names just kind of fused together and stuck, and the Black Dahlia was born.
I do love that nickname, though. It's a shame it ends the way it does with that
It,
nickname.
yes, it's not like, oh, she's the Black Dahlia. It has gone into a very dark space. And I think a lot of people think that the name Black Dahlia is associated more so with her murder, but it was a nickname prior to that.
If she would have been an actress or
Oh,
made
maybe.
some modeling or something, it would have been a very pretty nickname.
It would have.
Mm-hmm.
So, like I said, she was heading out to San Diego, and while she was there, she would frequent a diner, and the workers noted that she was very, very moody, unfriendly, and she always seemed very stressed out. Also to note, at this time in San Diego, she was living with a bunch of other women, and they all noted that she was kind of odd, and they did not like having her as a roommate. So this could potentially be pointing to maybe something is going on in her world, either internally or externally. It could be connected to what ends up happening to her.
Yeah, she could be stressed out, especially I couldn't live in a house full of women.
I can't live with anyone
Ugh,
at all, so I get it.
that would stress me out. And also, like, she doesn't have her own place. She just went
Hmm.
from living with this guy and his girlfriend to now she's living in a house full of women and just trying to maybe find her place and purpose.
Yeah.
That would be very stressful. That would make me weird and angry.
Yeah, I get that.
It makes sense.
It does. Now, also, while she was living in San Diego, she starts hanging out with a married man who had recently been discharged from the service for psychological reasons. Just keep that in your back pocket.
Okay.
His name was Robert Manley, but his nickname was Red due to the fact that he had red hair. So we got Black Dahlia and Red, two little color styled nicknames.
Hmm.
But they hit it off really well. They start hanging out all the time. She randomly decides to head back to Los Angeles. And it wasn't clear on if she was trying to move back or if she was going back up there to visit. But for whatever reason, she decides to go back to Los Angeles, and Red offers to go with her. They drive up, and he drops her off at the Biltmore Hotel.
The famous hotel.
Yes. This ends up being her last official known whereabouts. People still to this day say they see her ghost there, which I don't think makes sense because I personally do not believe that she was murdered at the hotel. But, if that was the last place she was, maybe her spirit kind of gravitated towards it.
Yeah, you hear that quite often when it's somebody of importance and they die in a hotel or something. Maybe I think Marilyn Monroe's is one of them. The
Well, she
famous
died at
hotel.
home.
Yeah, but the hotel that she's famous for haunting was like one of the places she stayed quite often.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, and maybe if Elizabeth Short she didn't have a homestead at this point, where would she haunt?
I guess, yeah. So it is believed that she was dropped off at this hotel on January 8th, 1947. She supposedly told Red that she was going to be meeting her sister and that she described her as a blonde, but in reality, her sister was actually a brunette. So there's a little
Oh,
bit more of that kind of fishiness, maybe compulsive liar, or maybe she kind of has something going on and she doesn't want people to know what she's up to.
yeah, that would make sense.
But she was said to be seen by some witnesses later that week. 12 witnesses actually came forward saying that they saw her at Union Station and she was trying to forward some luggage to Alaska, which is very odd. That's
Yes,
all the information I have about that.
I
I
did.
want to know everything about why she was trying to send bags to Alaska.
Exactly. That part is always very odd. Was she planning to move to Alaska? Did she know somebody in Alaska? Was
Was
she
she
running
fleeing?
away?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Was she fleeing?
Or was she sending stuff to Alaska to try to get someone off her trail, maybe?
Oh, that too. That part's very odd, especially if none of her family mentioned it or were like, oh,
Yeah.
yeah, she said moving to Alaska, making that big of a jump, that's something that you wouldn't keep private. you most likely would tell your friend's family, sister, hey,
Unless you're trying to start over
mm-hmm.
secretly.
Yeah.
Well, also that week, a witness came forward saying that a woman who fits Elizabeth's description came running out of a bar and asked a police officer for protection from her boyfriend who was in the military and he was trying to kill her.
Red? She's still with Red, right?
At that time, she would have still been with Red if this is
Yeah.
true, yes. And the police officer decides, by the way that this police officer decides to help, is walking this woman back to the bar where her boyfriend was. And
Of
we don't,
course.
of course, of course. Now, we do not know if this actually was Elizabeth. She just fits the description, but it is kind of a weird coincidence for her to be running away from an angry military boyfriend. And it's the same week that she goes back to California and ends up being murdered.
True. I think it was.
I do too. And I think
think
that
it was.
police officer could have potentially saved her life.
It's odd that you hear stories like that where the police officer brings them back to their abuser. I don't think it happens as often as it used to, but I feel like that's just something of the times that you would hear of them bringing you back.
Probably, yeah. And they probably had this idea like, oh, she's crazy, or she ran out of bar. Maybe they're like, oh, she's drunk, and just chose not to believe her. I don't know.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Sloppy police work there.
Always.
But we, of course, will get into some more sloppy police work in this story.
As we always do.
But now this takes us to January 15th, 1947. That morning, Betty Bessinger was walking through Leimert Park, which is a residential neighborhood in Los Angeles, and she was walking around with her daughter when she notices just a few feet from the sidewalk what she believes to be a discarded mannequin. A discarded, broken mannequin, I might add.
Mm.
And she was a little freaked out at first. She was like, oh, I think I should call the cops about this mannequin so they can come collect it because I don't want it to scare the neighborhood children, which I think it would have definitely scared the neighborhood children if they did actually end up seeing it.
Yeah,
because
most definitely.
It ended up not being a discarded, broken mannequin. It sadly ended up being the naked and very brutally tortured body of Elizabeth Short. Now, the really kind of famous part of how her body was found is that it was found bisected. Now, bisection refers to being split in half at the torso. So her legs, her lower half was no longer connected to her top half.
Mm.
And we will get into some details about that because that definitely plays a very big part in looking for a suspect.
Mm-hmm.
Now, her body had also been scrubbed clean with a brush, and the scrubbing apparently was so aggressive that it had left markings all over her body.
They were really trying to get rid of that evidence.
They were, yes. Her intestines had also been tucked underneath her body, and her breasts were very badly bruised. Alongside that, a chunk of her thigh had been taken off or cut out. And turns out that this spot on her thigh was where she had a rose tattoo.
Trying to make it where it wasn't very easily identifiable.
Yes. Yeah. Whoever did this, because this is unsolved, so whoever did this, they knew what they were doing.
Oh, yeah.
And we'll get in, of course, to more details, but they knew what they were doing with how they left her body,
Mm-hmm.
where they left her body, what they were doing to try to cover things up. And in regards to some police stuff and kind of like messing with the police and the media, they really knew what they were doing.
I think so, too. I don't think it was their first time at all.
I don't. Well,
all right. Well, let's keep going into it, and then we'll revisit that thought.
We'll deliberate after.
Yeah.
Now, there were also rope burns on her thigh, neck, ankles, and wrists, meaning she would have been tied up at some point. And her mouth had also been slit on each corner extending to her ears, creating a Joker type of smile.
You know, I didn't know that until when we covered this before and you told me that. And then when I Googled the images, I was like, how did I not know that? It was so horrifying.
Hmm.
It's very, very creepy that you would
Yeah,
do
that
that.
alongside the fact that she was found bisected
Yeah.
really
I just
blew
hate the smiley face thing. I hate that.
it. I mean, that takes somebody like this, whoever did this didn't just kill her, didn't just kill and torture her. They went to the extremes of all
Yeah.
of it. And also, a lot of what happened to her, they believe happened post mortem. Like, yes,
Mm.
she most likely was tortured while she was still alive, sadly, but they do believe that a lot of it was afterwards, which I think makes it a little stranger. That Joker type smile that is cut to her ears is actually known as a Glasgow smile, and it was a torture method that originated in Scotland in, I believe, the 1920s.
I don't think you told me that last time.
Well, surprise.
Thank you.
Now, the body had also been drained of blood, and there was no blood at the scene, which points to her having been killed elsewhere and then later placed here. And speaking of being placed there, the way she was positioned was very obviously deliberate. Her elbows were bent up with her hands over her head, and her legs were wide open.
We say this every time, but I really hate when the body is positioned afterwards as
Uh-huh.
well.
Yeah, you mentioned
Ugh.
that when we covered the Gainesville Ripper.
Oh, I just hate that.
That's kind of part of why the woman Betty, when she found this, she initially thought it was a mannequin. She thought, it's cut in half. You know how mannequins, a lot of them come apart at the torso,
Yeah.
and it was positioned kind of like a fashion pose. I think that, I don't know, the positioning, that part really, I mean, all of it really bothers me, of course, but there is something about the fact that she's positioned that makes it
Mm-hmm.
just a little
Yeah,
creepier and heavier.
it is. She wasn't just thrown out into the grass.
Hmm.
Somebody sat there and took their time. And also, with taking such time to position, you're also risking getting caught.
Yeah, and it's not easy to
No,
move a body. Now, they were moving two parts of it, I guess.
that's also going to make you think. Probably had to take the torso out of the
They
vehicle or whatever
had to have had
first.
help. There's no way they did this alone, in my opinion.
What time did they find her?
It was a little bit after sunrise, not super
Mm,
early, but I'm thinking about 9 a.m.
okay, so he could have done it. He or she. I would guess it'd be a male.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, could have done it in the early morning hours. It could have been somebody that was also watching the area, kind of seeing,
Hmm.
do people go walking at 6 a.m.? Does somebody get up and go to work early at 7, leave
Yep.
the house? What time
Somebody
does the
did see something
mailman?
though. And I'll get into it, but there
Oh,
was a
yeah.
witness who saw something
Oh,
that
yeah, that's
morning.
right. Yeah, whoever did this, and they took their time to position and get everything together. I feel like they were watching the area for a little bit just to ensure what
Yeah,
was going
I
to
mean,
go
whoever did
down.
it they were so calculated.
Mm-hmm.
They were obviously aware.
It wasn't random.
And one more little note about how her body was found: the bottom half was actually about a foot away from the top half. And it did not take long for police or reporters to flood the scene. And there were like tons of photos taken. This case was all over the media, and they literally took photos of the crime scene and all of the horrific, gruesome everything that was there, including her naked body, and they posted it in the newspapers.
That's wild to me for the times.
Yeah, and all of it is still online. You can still see all of these photos, and they're not
Yeah.
censored. You don't have to go to some weird
Oh,
website. They're everywhere. Now, her fingerprints were used to confirm her identity because initially they were like, who is she? But thankfully, due to that arrest that happened in 1943 for underage drinking,
I was
that
going to
was how they were
say,
able to link her.
yeah, because they have her prints on file.
Yes. And after she was identified, her mother was notified. However, her mother was not notified by police or in a respectful way. So a reporter from the Examiner actually got a hold of her mother's phone number and called and lied, saying that Elizabeth had recently won a local beauty pageant and that they were asking for information, like some backstory that they could run in the paper about her for running this pageant or for
Ugh.
winning this pageant. And so her mom tells her, tells the reporter some stuff about Elizabeth and her backstory and everything. And then at the end of the phone call, the reporter comes clean. I don't know why, but they come clean and they're like, oh, well, actually, she didn't win anything. We just needed some information about her. And they just bluntly break the news to her about what happened and how her body was found and like hung up.
Awful human beings.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about the scene and what else was found. Some evidence. So the biggest standout, obviously, is the fact that her body was bisected. And it was very precise. Now, for this to actually be done, you need to really know what you're doing. I didn't know this. My search history was crazy during this because I had to research about the bisection because not just anybody can do it. It's not just cutting something in half or cutting a different body part. You're cutting a very specific place, and this was done very precise, very surgical.
It's not something you just go in there and have no clue what you're doing and you ace it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the bisection was done just between the second and third lumbar vertebrae. And not only is this incredibly difficult to actually do, it is also incredibly rare. Trained surgeons don't really have a need to perform a bisection. Obviously, they have the knowledge of the anatomy, so they know if they were going to do it, they know how. But it's just really weird that somebody knew how to do this.
Just makes me think the person was practicing on animals or something for a while.
Maybe.
I mean, because if you are a surgeon, nobody comes in and is like, hey, we need to bisect this woman from the waist. Like, that's not happening in any procedure. And
no, it would kill them instantly.
Yeah. And to get this like so precisely done, I do see, of course, a knowledge of human anatomy, such as a surgeon, somebody that's actually in there. And also there's got to be some practice done. You just don't ace this your first time, even if you are a surgeon.
So this actually, the bisection was, I think it happened after she was already dead. The official cause of death was actually a concussion to the brain from blows to the head, along with hemorrhaging due to the slits from her mouth.
It's awful. And she was probably tied up the whole time too.
Probably, yeah. Now, also at the scene, they found tire tracks and a heel print in one of those tracks. However, nothing has ever come of that. I don't believe anything was ever tracked down. But they also found near those tracks a cement sack that had potential blood on it. And again, nothing ever came of that. There's a lot of evidence that has been lost or destroyed or just ignored, sadly, which is part of, I think, why this case is still unsolved.
Sloppy police work again.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a couple of things. I don't think they really had DNA back then.
No.
And then with the heel print, it's a different time period. Most men all wore like a dress shoe or something, unless you've got like, oh, this man's foot measures about like a size 11. Just a heel print, that would be hard to distinguish. Whereas nowadays, most men wear tennis shoes or a sneaker, and that's going to give a very distinct marking.
Yeah.
That you can track down easily. And tire marks, I don't know. I feel like there wasn't a very large variety of cars like there are today as well.
Yeah, I'm not sure how that was. And I think tires especially were like, I think most tires were tires. Like now we have like a lot of tires.
Yeah, they usually measure their circumference, the pattern, what kind of vehicles are manufactured with that type. So a lot more that goes into it now, I believe.
Yeah.
We could be wrong, though, but we're innocent until proven guilty.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So, like I said, a witness did come forward claiming to have seen something early that morning. They actually saw a car pull up to that same spot where her body ends up being found. And they pull up and somebody got out of the car, moved something, and seemingly positioned it on the ground, got back in the car, and drove off.
And when was this again?
Early that morning of the January 15th,
Mm.
like before sunrise.
I think he came back around, scoping it out. Oh, she's still there. Ooh, maybe her legs should be a little higher. Or
Mm.
maybe I should tilt her this way. You can't really see her from here.
Or that witness could even be the killer.
Mm,
Trying
could
just
be.
like playing with the cops,
Mm-hmm. That happens.
It does. And that actually happens in this case a little bit.
Mm.
So a tip comes in notifying the police about Elizabeth's purse and a single shoe being found in a nearby trash can. However, by the time the police arrived to this trash can, the trash had been collected. They were never able to track down that purse or that shoe. They were able to kind of figure out, okay, well, if this person was heading this direction and they dumped it in the trash here, blah, blah, blah. But it led to a dead end.
Mm. So they didn't decide to like keep the person's shoe when they reported it. They were just like, I'm going to report this. And then, oh, well, it looks like the trash is gone.
Yeah, that is also odd, and that makes me think
Mm-hmm.
it was potentially the killer. Or I think it could have been a false tip. There are a lot of false tips and a lot of false confessions around this case. But then the examiner received an envelope with some of Elizabeth's belongings in it, actually. This included a social security card, birth certificate, and a little address book from Mark Hansen.
They received it like in the mail.
Yeah, in an envelope. But what's really weird is when they opened it, they noticed that it smelled like gasoline.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
So this would suggest that whoever sent this stuff in covered it in gasoline, most likely to. I mean, I guess they could have intended to burn it, and then last minute they're like, oh, let me just send it in. I don't buy that. I think that they were trying to get rid of fingerprints because gasoline can actually dissolve the oil left behind from a fingerprint.
Mm-hmm. To me, that makes more sense. If you're going to burn it, you're going to burn it.
Exactly. Like a lot of people are like, no, they were going to burn it. It's like, why didn't they burn it? Like this person knows what they're doing. They are so calculated. This was to mess with the police 100%.
Oh, most definitely.
They also received letters from the supposed killer taunting the police. These were done in ransom note style, but one of them came in that was handwritten. The handwriting on that letter connected back to the handwriting found on letters left at the scene of other murders. This was connected to the lipstick killer. A lot of people believe that the lipstick killer could have been the one behind Black Dahlia's murder. However, it doesn't really seem to fully connect. I don't believe so.
Obviously, they didn't connect it enough to do anything
Mm-mm.
about it.
No.
It could have been rumor. A lot of people wrote in that nice, beautiful cursive handwriting back in the day, too.
And it also could have been kind of a weird coincidence.
Yeah.
But a lot of this evidence just kind of never got taken care of. A lot of it was lost, like I said. A lot of it was never tested. And this is partially due to sloppy police work, of course. But also at that time in the 1940s, there was a lot of police corruption. There still is
Yeah.
a lot of police corruption, of course. But it was very different and it was worse in the 1940s. Specifically with the LAPD, the mafia was very involved and kind of had their hands in all sorts of things with the police department.
Oh, do you think this could have been mafia?
That is definitely a theory.
I wonder how and why, though. Or are you going to get into that?
I don't know why. This doesn't feel mafia related, in my opinion,
No.
because the thing with like mobsters is that they don't kill because they want to kill. They kill because they've got a job to do, and
Yeah.
they shoot you, and they're like, "Where's my money?" That's it.
Mhm.
They're not strange, crazy serial killer types.
They're not precisely cutting you in half.
No, I've never heard of anything. And like they'll cut off a finger or two and be like, you know, where's the bag of cash? We're
Yeah.
gonna cut off your finger, but they're not slicing and
Yeah.
torturing and bisecting.
Which is so odd to me. You would think the LA Police Department at the time would have taken this a lot more seriously since
Hmm.
it was all over the news. It was
People were terrified.
yeah, it was a huge thing, and they're just kind of like, meh, it's Tuesday.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's wild that they didn't take this. Maybe they weren't equipped for this kind of case, and they were kind of
They
embarrassed.
definitely weren't. Yeah, I mean, even though it was Los Angeles, it was still the 40s and they had never really seen a crime quite like this. They did believe that there was a serial killer on the loose, especially because of the nature of the crime. And there were a lot of other women turning up dead in Los Angeles at the time, but they were not as gruesome as Black Dahlia. Also, at the time, it wasn't referred to as a serial killer. It was a chain killer.
Yeah.
But because nothing was getting done with this case, it was actually taken from the LAPD and moved on to the district attorney's office.
Is that kind of like the FBI?
I'm not sure. It's definitely a step above a regular police department.
Okay.
But obviously they couldn't figure anything out either for whatever reason.
There's not really a lot to go on.
No, which is weird because there is at the same time.
I would say for our time period, yes. For that time period,
yeah, because there's not much to, like, if you're not testing things, really all you're going off of is a surgical bisection and
a witness that's kind of like
a witness statement and some evidence that's covered in gasoline that you can't do anything with at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I guess that would transition us into theories.
Let's see what you got.
So our first one is the Cleveland torso killer. This was an unknown serial killer or chain killer at the time who had killed 12 people between the years 1934 and 1938 in the Cleveland, Ohio area. And he was known for decapitation. And the way that he would cut his victims up was very surgical. And this was kind of the only thing that they could compare Elizabeth Short's murder to. However, this was in Cleveland, not California, and he was not considered active after the year 1938. And of course, who knows? Serial killers can travel. I think he could have literally just taken a break. The police in Cleveland could have been catching on to him and getting close. So maybe the killer was like, oh, got to make a run for it. So he heads out to California and stops killing people and just kind of goes under the radar for a little while. And then maybe he meets Elizabeth Short and decides to pick back up where he left off.
It makes sense to me. A lot of serial killers do tend to have a pattern of a bunch of kills at once and then a quiet time, a bunch of kills at once, and then back to a quiet time again. And of course, if it looked like he was getting caught on to in Cleveland, going completely across the country, doing it over there.
But then I think, why didn't he continue after the Black Dahlia?
To me, it seems like when you have a criminal and they're doing murders or robberies, a lot of the time they are picked up for a crime that's completely not the one that they're, really known for.
Yeah, a lot of people think that it was the Cleveland torso killer and that he ended up getting arrested for something else.
Yeah.
Right after.
They go to prison.
Yeah. And that he just never confessed to being Cleveland torso killer.
Well, why would you? And maybe
if he could have been caught for something like arson and he could have only gotten like 10 years. Yeah. Whereas if he confessed to being a serial killer, he would have had the death penalty.
True. And maybe by the time he got out, he was older. He was just like, I'm not going through all that again.
You were tired.
Oh, I'm tired. Prison was a shit show. A lot of times I feel like that typically tends to be the case. Or they die. Take the secret with them to the grave.
Yeah. I want to cover the Cleveland torso killer in full. It's a very interesting case.
I feel you should.
So let's go on to our next theory, or suspect, I should say. And this is going to be one of the more obvious suspects, and that was the
Red.
married, Red, Robert Manley, who, remember, was a married man at the time that he was seeing her, and he was discharged from the military due to psychological issues, which could be literally anything, especially in the 1940s, but it is
True.
important to note.
Mm-hmm.
But he was the last confirmed person to see her. This obviously got the police's attention, and they start investigating him. They are interrogating him, but he does end up passing 2 polygraph tests and was cleared by the police. And of course, it's a polygraph test.
Yeah,
So
we've
what?
talked
Like,
about these before.
they don't really hold up anymore, and I don't know
No.
what people thought of them in the 40s, but
I
I don't
think
know.
I think they relied on them a lot more.
Probably.
Mm-hmm.
His wife, Red's wife, actually said that she found notes where he wrote about having a guilty conscience, but she never found out what it was that he felt so guilty about.
Mm.
And he was also in service. He was in the war. It could have been guilt about killing the enemy and
Mm-hmm.
all sorts of things like that, leaving a soldier behind or something. Or it could
True.
have been for the murder of Elizabeth Short. Or it could have
But
been for cheating on his wife, too.
yep, that could be a thing as well. But does he have the surgical capabilities and knowledge to do such a thing? And
No.
exactly, where would he have kept her that his wife wouldn't know? So Red's been missing for quite a few days here. I feel like, that's the person you want to point the finger at, and it makes sense, but then you have to look at all the other details.
Yeah. That's
Mhm.
the one thing about it. It's like, can he bisect a body? And maybe he could have bisected a body, but what are the odds that he did?
Mhm.
I'm not super familiar with his time in the military. I don't believe he was a doctor.
I don't think it's him. I think it's a person that you want to be like, that's an easy scapegoat. Last person
Exactly.
seen with her, the whole cheating on his wife. It was the mistress. You need to get rid of her. There was a fight,
Exactly.
allegedly a fight at a bar. But going into, like I said, the bisection, the time it would have taken for the killer to be with Elizabeth, to do all this work on the body, drain all the blood, get everything prepared, drive out, do all. His wife would have been like, well, Red's been missing for about a day and a half, 2 days. What is this fool doing?
Right.
That's how I think.
No, I agree. So our next suspect is William Herons. This one I decided to include only because a lot of people have gravitated towards this theory. I really do not think it makes any sense, but this man was arrested for the murder and kidnapping of 6-year-old girl Suzanne Dagnan. He actually dismembered her, and her body parts were found in a nearby sewer. However, this was in the Chicago area, and he did end up going to jail, and he was in jail at the time that Elizabeth's body was discovered. But a lot of people think that he is not the actual killer of the 6-year-old girl, and that there was this like wrongful conviction thing.
Oh, he got pinned for it, but it wasn't actually him, and the killer was still out there.
And the real killer left Chicago and it was heading out to LA and got Elizabeth, which it makes sense. It's just there's not a lot of great traction to that case or to that theory that I can make any genuine sense of it.
Yeah, other than something similar happened in a different area. Yeah.
We would need some evidence to come forward.
Mm-hmm.
But let's go ahead and talk about our next suspect, and that is Leslie Dillon. This is a big one. A lot of people also gravitate towards this. Like, this is like one of the bigger suspects.
All right.
So Leslie Dillon was a bellhop in Los Angeles and a mortician's assistant.
And
I think he worked, if I remember correctly, I think he worked at one of the hotels as a bellhop that she had stayed in. But the thing about it, anytime I bring up that he was a mortician's assistant, it's always like, oh, that makes so much sense.
Guilty.
However, he was only a mortician's assistant for 3 weeks.
Oh.
And then I thought about it also. I'm like, okay, what are they doing at a funeral home? A mortician is not bisecting or doing any kind of cutting or anything surgical to a body at all. So no.
No. Okay. So that ends that, so he wouldn't have been.
Yeah, so he would not have had knowledge, I think, to do that.
Mm-hmm. Especially if he
Um,
was just the assistant.
yeah, and for 3 weeks.
Mm.
He was like getting coffee for
There's
like
still that kind of
the
fascination
desk.
with the macabre and just like wanting to take that type of job.
Yeah. Well, and he was actually also fascinated with Elizabeth Short. He was said to be a writer, and he would call the LAPD all the time asking for details about the case for his book or whatever he was doing. He was calling for research purposes,
Sus.
supposedly. And at one point, he started saying, while he would call in, he would start saying that his friend is the one who committed the murder, but he couldn't tell any more information about it. It was just, oh, my friend is the one who did it.
And they
And
knew who this guy was, and they didn't think that we need to look into this a little bit more.
well, not at first, but a psychologist who was working with the LAPD at the time was like, hey, this is kind of weird. And the psychologist believed that Leslie Dillon was calling in, getting information about the case to see what all the police knew so
That's
that he
what.
could stay ahead. And that the psychologist also believed that Leslie was calling in and doing kind of a partial confession, saying that his friend was the one who did it because his guilty conscience needed to get it off his chest. And that was the best way that he could cope without actually giving it away. Does that make
That's
sense?
yeah. I think 100%. A lot of times the killer will try to be either at the scene of the crime or, keeping up with the news, just ensuring like what does the police know? What kind of
Yeah.
evidence do they have? Are they on to me? That's quite common. So
Yeah.
to me that makes total sense.
And he actually was brought in for questioning, and his interrogation experience was so aggressive and harsh that he actually ended up suing the police
Oh.
department, and he actually ended up winning, and the city had to pay for all of his troubles and compensation and everything. So that kind of ended up clearing him of
Mm.
being a suspect, not because they found anything to say that he wasn't, but because he beat the system in that regard. But apparently, he was not even in Los Angeles at the time of her murder. He was actually in San Francisco. I don't know if that was ever confirmed. And there's also a theory about the mafia being related to this because supposedly Leslie Dillon was part of the mafia, not like an actual mobster, but he worked for them.
Mm.
And he was involved with it because of the fact that the mafia was so involved with the police corruption, they were covering up for Leslie.
I don't know. To me, that's reaching a little bit. The mafia usually doesn't go out of their way unless it's
No.
something that's going to get them in trouble, not.
When he's just like a bellhop. Like, I don't think he was
Yeah.
that high up to where they would care too much, you know?
Mm-mm. I think that's a lot of reaching and trying to pull
It is.
different things from different areas and make them like, oh, look, all these things are in common.
I agree.
It's a
But,
coincidence, I think.
I don't think he did it.
Mm. You want to at first, but then it's like,
Yeah, that one's so close. It's like, oh, that makes sense, but then it
falls
doesn't quite
apart.
land. Yeah, it's like you can kind of fly the plane, but you can't land it on that one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, true.
But this next one comes pretty close to landing. So this is the Hodel theory, and this circles around George Hodel. But to get into this, first we have to discuss a little bit of his son, Steve Hodel. So Steve Hodel was a detective for the LAPD between 1963 and 1985, so quite a while.
Mm-hmm.
And he really believed that his father, George Hodel, was the killer. And he has gone on to write books about this. He's been on podcasts about it. I think he was on Dr. Phil or some type of show like that on TV, talking about his father being the murderer of Elizabeth Short.
Like recent, not when I say recently, but within like
Um,
our lifetime.
yeah, he's been saying it for a long time. I
Oh,
don't remember when it was that he put out the books or when he went on the talk show. I think it was the late 90s that he really started picking up with this.
interesting.
But his father, George Hodel, was actually a gynecologist. So he's medical.
Mm-hmm. Had to go to medical school.
Yep. And he was also known for hosting these crazy, elaborate, wild parties that the Hollywood elites would come to.
Oh,
So
ick.
so I'm sure something horrible was going on there, of course. So either
Ick.
way, no matter what, this guy I think is a disgusting scumbag.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of people believe that, remember when we were talking about how Elizabeth was potentially wanting to get into Hollywood? And that's
Mm.
why Mark Hansen gave her that address book. People think that George Hodel was actually Elizabeth's gynecologist, and he ended up inviting her to some of these Hollywood parties, and something went wrong.
Or
Now,
he became obsessed with her.
perhaps. And actually, in 1949, his daughter took him to trial for sexually abusing her. However, he was found not guilty, and it did come out. The family did later say that she would make that claim about everyone in the
Oh,
family, and that she was kind of a
crazy.
kind.
Pathological liar.
Yes, that she was a bit of a pathological liar.
Yeah, so you kind of
Which,
got to throw that notion out.
yes, and like who knows? But he was found innocent in that case.
Mm-hmm.
Who knows? But after that happened, the police department was like, hey, let's look into this guy. I don't know why they decided to necessarily, but right after the case with the sexual abuse claim, they decided to look into him, and they ended up surveillancing his house in 1950. And at one point, they caught him saying, quote, put a pillow over her head and covered her with a blanket. They thought there was something fishy. Anyway, now they might have figured it out. Killed her. Maybe I did kill my secretary. Suppose I did kill the Black Dahlia. They can't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary now, 'cause she's dead. End quote.
Did his secretary die? I forget.
She did. So
Mm.
her name was Ruth Spalding. She worked for his clinic, and the official report is that she committed suicide by overdose. But
Mm-hmm.
supposedly she was going to blackmail him, and she had all this documentation about things that he was doing to his patients that he should not have been doing. I guess he was abusing them. Supposedly, that's why he decided to kill her and made it look like a suicide. And then he's caught saying that he did kill her and potentially killed the Black Dahlia.
I mean, this one makes a lot more sense to
It
me.
does. This is the
Maybe,
main one. Like, this is
yeah.
the one that the general consensus is around.
If he was doing things at his practice and maybe he did something to Elizabeth, went too far, and she was going to report it, and he just got out of this drama beforehand, and now he's got his secretary over here saying that she's going to report him too.
Mm-hmm. And the secretary could have been working with Elizabeth on it, so
Mm-hmm.
he had to get rid of both. But then I'm like, why would he kill Elizabeth in such an insane, gruesome way and stage the body and do everything that happened to her? And with the secretary, just stage suicide, It doesn't
Well,
quite add up.
with the suicide, you're definitely not going to want to be one of the key people of suspect when it comes
Yeah.
to the
Like he wanted to
secretary.
kind of throw it all off.
Yeah. And who knows if this guy does some freaky things in his free time. And
Yeah,
the
he was
body
actually
was
known for some really strange, dark
mm,
sexual things. Like they found all sorts of weird books, and he had connections to people who were into some not so great sexual ventures.
and with her body being posed sexually like that,
I
I
agree.
I
But then
if
a gynecologist doesn't have the surgical knowledge.
you still have to go to medical school and things like that. Maybe like he said before, maybe he's practiced on animals.
Or he could have initially wanted to have been a surgeon and then was like, oh,
Hmm.
I'll be a gynecologist instead.
Yeah. I mean, to me that one does makes the most sense.
Yeah, well, and he, right after the whole thing with the surveillancing happened in 1950, he fled to the Philippines, which makes him
Mm,
look more guilty.
definitely.
And he lived there until 1999. And when he came back to America, he came back to California. Supposedly, a girlfriend of his stated that he said that they would never prove that he did the murder, which is kind of like, why are you saying that? You know?
That's odd so many years later.
But something that I do think is kind of odd is that his son, Steve Hodel, has also claimed that his father is not only the murderer of Elizabeth Short, but that he's also the Zodiac killer, which does not add up because the Zodiac Killer was active in the 1960s in California, and his father, George Odell, was in the Philippines as of 1950 to 1999. So I don't buy that. And then he also believes that his father was the Philippines jigsaw killer and the lipstick killer.
Oh
And I'm like,
my.
I don't think your father had that much going on and didn't get caught. That's like 100 victims
That's a lot.
between several countries,
Mm-hmm.
between a lot of decades. I'm like, I just don't think that. I do think he could have killed Elizabeth Short. I absolutely think he killed his secretary 100%.
Mm-hmm.
But
He's
I
the
don't
best
know.
candidate. He's the best candidate.
Well,
Oh, okay.
there is one more.
One more.
One more. Now, George Odell is the main suspect. He's actually listed as the murderer of Elizabeth Short. It's never been confirmed, but it literally says on like Wikipedia that he did it. However, if you do a little more digging, like I did, you will come across one more really good potential suspect, and that is Walter Alonzo Bailey. Now, there's not too much information about him, but this is a man who is said to have known Elizabeth Short.
Okay.
He is from Los Angeles. He actually lived on Norton Avenue in Leimert Park, which is exactly where her body was found. His house was only a block or two from where her body was found. So that is a little weird on its own.
Pretty close to home there.
Exactly. And he was also a surgeon.
Oh, see, that would go back with knowing the neighborhood, the activity,
Yep.
what time to get in and out.
He knows how to cut a body
True.
correctly. Yeah. And he worked about 5 blocks from the Biltmore Hotel, which was where she was last officially seen. And his daughter knew Elizabeth's sister, Virginia. So there's a little bit of a correlation there.
Yeah. So what happened with this guy? How did he get out of this?
Well, so he actually ends up losing his job. I don't know why he ended up losing his job, but at the same time, his wife filed for divorce because he was having an affair.
Oh, he was
Now,
having an affair as well.
I don't know who the affair was with. Like, honestly, could have been Elizabeth if he's said to have known her. But also at the time, I'm just throwing out theories here.
Yeah.
But he also was developing early set Alzheimer's and a disease that I don't remember the name of the disease, but it was a disease that causes your brain to shrink. And when you develop this, it causes really drastic changes in your personality.
Is it dementia?
No, I don't. It was kind of a very rare thing, and he was having it with the Alzheimer's.
Gotcha.
And he was pretty young too. He was older, but he was young for this stuff to be happening to him. One of the big things was that they couldn't find any killers who had done anything too similar before or after this murder, and it kind of seems like a one-off thing. And so this kind of adds up that he was this kind of normal guy, develops this disease that's causing his brain to shrink, causing drastic personality changes. And a lot of the times people with this condition become very aggressive and start to attack people. His ex-wife also filed a lawsuit against him during the divorce situation, and she was claiming that she knew a secret about him, that if she went public with it, it would ruin him forever.
Oh.
I believe this is the guy.
This guy does have a lot more things that are adding up.
Yeah, I mean, just the fact that he's an actual surgeon. Nobody else is a surgeon except the potential Cleveland torso killer, but I think that one's a little far-fetched.
But yeah, I feel like he does have the most things that add up. I'm just not sure why he wasn't looked into more.
So in the research, it got really confusing, so I chose not to add all this part, but somebody had stumbled upon some old photos that connected to Elizabeth Short's family, and they was like, oh, I didn't know we had this connection to her, and they're doing this research, and they find this name that connects to his name, and then they look into this thing on Norton Avenue, and it all just started to line up and connect, and then this theory was born, and people start looking into him, and
gotcha.
all of a sudden, everything starts to make more sense.
Yeah, now it's a little bit too late.
He's been dead for quite some time. I mean, he was getting old in the 40s.
Yeah.
So We will never know. I don't think this will ever be solved, honestly.
I don't. I think it'll be always a theory.
Very insane, scary case. Who do you think did it?
I mean, along the way, I thought I had this one or that one, but as you present the last suspect, it just seems like it does make a lot more sense.
Mm-hmm.
But then you've got, why would the guy confess and kill his secretary?
Yeah.
It's very odd. There's a couple of characters that make sense.
George Hodel never confessed to Elizabeth's murder. He just said, "So what if I did?"
Yeah. But
But
still,
he did confess to Ruth Spalding. So who knows?
it could be either. I think those two are the best
Mm-hmm.
out of the.
Not Leslie Dillon.
No.
It's not the wrongfully convicted murderer.
It's not Red.
No, it can't be Red.
No. He just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time having an affair, I believe.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Oh, geez. It's such a shocking and sad crime.
Mm-hmm.
It really is. Especially, I know everyone says, she wanted to be famous, and that kind of seems that was, something made up afterwards, that it wasn't quite the case. But even if she was trying to start dabbling into Hollywood and going to these parties and thinking she could make something of herself, it's very sad that this is the fame that was received.
I agree.
Like, we'll always know the Black Dahlia. It's just maybe not the way we should know the Black Dahlia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. But that's all I have on it.
Well, you did amazing for the third time.
Thank you.
Hope the third time was a charm. And I do think you threw some things in there that I didn't hear the last two times, which was interesting.
Yeah. I'm very familiar with this case now.
As of now, I think you're the expert of the Black Dahlia almost. But it was good. Let's see. Hopefully this is something that everybody can listen to now, regardless of the quality. This is what you're getting.
Yeah.
We just can't cover this one again.
Yeah, if this one does not record correctly or something went wrong, that's what it is.
You're just going to have to just suffer through it if it is.
Yep.
Well, I guess with that being said,
good night.
And pleasant nightmares.
Bye.
Bye.